Cool. What is going on, guys? It's your boy Luke back for another showdown live stream. This time for Thursday night football between the Browns and the Broncos. So we're not going to delay. We're going to hop right into the picks here for tonight, starting off with our player poll for this Thursday night football slate. So going to go ahead and share my projections from my side over here. And if you guys are new to the channel, if you guys have been here for a while, I'll remind you though, these are my Patreon projections. This is where you can get access to my data for every player in this week's field. So that's what you're taking a look at. If you guys want access yourselves, feel free to go ahead and check out the link in the description. That'll be my Patreon page, just $1 for the month for all the projections that you see. But without any more delay, let's hop right into the projections for this week. And I'll remind you, if you have any questions, feel free to go ahead and put them down in the chat. I'll get to them whenever I see them. So starting off with our quarterbacks, obviously Baker Mayfield not going to be playing. So we're going to be dealing with Case Keenum as a spot starter here. Teddy Bridgewater, a little bit banged up. He was questionable going into the week, going to be all right to suit up tonight. So out of the two, the one I prefer out of the, it's not even close in my opinion, is going to be Case Keenum, who might be a little bit of a surprise, but somebody who was remarkably effective the last time we saw him as a starter. Went out, was able to have 3 touchdowns in about 50% of the games that he was out there starting. Somebody who, again, doesn't have a ton of experience, but is a little bit underrated in my opinion. And obviously, if we take a look at these two teams on paper, I'd much rather have the Cleveland side of things. And that's even despite all of these injuries. At the beginning of the week, I was a little bit less bullish on their chances, especially with Baker Mayfield at quarterback. But with Keenum, somebody who's going to be at 100% efficiency, not going to be dealing with any shoulder pain or any second guessing or anything like that, I really like that type of situation. I think that he gives them a much better chance to win this game. And as of right now, they are the favorites at this point, and I agree with that line. I think the Cleveland Browns should be the favorites here. A lot of people in the industry don't agree. A lot of people are taking the Broncos side of things here. They're really trying to stack that up. I just don't see it that way. I think a lot of people are looking a little bit too much into these injuries. They think the impact is going to be throughout the rest of the roster, and that's just not the case. This Cleveland defense is much superior than to this Broncos defense. Through a first 3 or 4 weeks, the Broncos defense on paper, it looked awesome. They were a top 5 defense, but that was because of the teams they played. They played against complete dog shit in terms of their competition. So just make sure you look into the numbers a little bit more. You need to allow for a large enough sample size before we start to make a lot of decisions on these type of people. So with that being said, Keenum is the lower owned of the two options. It's the guy I have projected for more points and also the person who gives you more leverage opportunities. So I like the price tag there at $9,400. I'm still going to have some Teddy Bridgewater. I do think that this game goes over the expected total. So as of right now, it's at 41.5 points. It was at 42.5 earlier on the week, actually moved down a little bit. I think it goes over. I think both these offenses put up somewhere in the range of 17 to 24 points. And that should be right around that number, if not a little bit over. So let's go down to some of these running backs. I don't hate going to Melvin Gordon. Melvin Gordon, once the team gets down into the red zone, it's definitely the one that they trust a little bit more in terms of their running backs. Javonte Williams, not getting a ton of carries in these games. So you can see their price at that same type of price point. So if I'm going to take a running back from one of these two teams, it is going to be Gordon, but not necessarily in love with the play. Probably somebody I'd go ahead and match the field on. You can see as of right now, both of them projected in that same type of ownership range, 21.3, 21.2% right there. I'd rather go on the Gordon side of things if we're taking it as a head-to-head matchup. The best running back on the slate, in my opinion, it's not even close. It's Ernest Johnson, somebody who's going to be a spot starter for this Browns team. Obviously, Nick Chubb out, Kareem Hunt on IR as well. He's only $4,600. He's probably going to see at least 16, 17 touches in this game, which is more than enough to pay that off. I think he's essentially a lock on this slate. This Cleveland offensive line is something else. You can essentially put a scrub back there, and he's going to run for 100 yards if you give him 20 carries. I really like Johnson, this type of scenario. And it's not like Johnson's a scrub. He's somebody who was drafted with a little bit of draft capital, 3rd-round pick, somebody who's shown quite a bit of athletic upside. Might not be the best blocker, might not be the best out of the backfield as a catcher. That's why he's a 3rd-string running back. But if you give him 15 to 20 carries, he should be able to at least get by on that type of front. Let's talk about the wide receivers. And I think a lot of my ownership on this slate is going to hover around a lot of these wide receivers. A lot of it's just because I think the total goes over what a lot of other people expect, right? I see this as maybe a 45, 46 point total, that kind of thing. And the rest of the industry isn't as high on this game. So first and foremost, Cortland Sutton, he's a very good play on the slate. He is $10,000, so you got to keep that in mind. But I love going to him at the captain slot. Definitely not being overlooked. You can see he's garnering quite a bit of ownership here at 34.5%, but that's well warranted. He is by far the best offensive weapon in this game. especially considering all the injuries that we've seen. Somebody who's seen an average of 8 targets per game to this point, averaging over 6 catches per game. Also leads the NFL in air yards. So the guy has gotten a shit ton of touches, a shit ton of looks going his way. So for Cortland Sutton there at $10,000, he's actually well warranted at that price tag for once. Not somebody that I'm avoiding. Let's go down to a few other picks that I do like here. Tim Patrick. It's a little bit more expensive than we'd like. But he's also being overlooked, right? Somebody who, if he was $4,000 or $5,000, would be chalk on this slate. So I don't hate going there. He's obviously a little bit cheaper than Sun. So if there's lineups where I don't have Sun in them, I'm almost surely going to have Tim Patrick. I'll probably have a few stacks with both of them together as well. Let's talk about the Cleveland side of things, which gets a little bit more interesting. So first and foremost, with Otto Beckham Jr., who, as of right now, again, I checked this about 10 minutes before we went on live here, is still a game time decision. We don't know whether he's going to be playing tonight. And all the reports as of right now are that he's trending towards not playing. He has an uphill, the quote is he has an uphill battle to climb, which you don't like to hear about any player, which means even if Otto Beckham Jr. ends up playing tonight, likely not going to make my pool. You're probably dealing with him at 80, maybe 90% health at very best after that kind of close, and probably going to be used as more of a, let's say, diversion, as more of a prop player here, probably just trying to take a little bit of the attention away from some of these other wide receivers. So the people that I will be targeting, even if Odell's in the lineup, we're going to be Jarvis Landry first and foremost, who I did not expect to be playing in this game. He was an IR at the beginning of the week. He was closer to a 50-50 to even play in this game, but was activated 2 days ago. He was activated with plenty of time to spare this week, which shows a ton of confidence behind his health. There wasn't any question marks as to whether he'd be able to suit up, which I think is a great sign for him. Somebody who's obviously going to get a ton of targets in this offense if Otto Beckham Jr. does not play. And just for evidence of that, take a look at the last 6 games of last season where Otto Beckham Jr. was not a factor. Jarvis Landry was a top 10 wide receiver over those last 6 weeks, which pretty much tells you everything you need to know. Obviously, Baker Mayfield is not going to be in at quarterback, which you could argue is a good thing for this offense. I mean, dealing with both running backs not playing as well, this team is very well going to pass the ball more than usual. I mean, they just don't have their typical backs back there. They're going to have to pass as a result. Case Keenum's also a different type of quarterback, loves to throw the ball downfield. I mean, Baker Mayfield, sure, he's got balls of steel, but he's not very good at throwing the ball downfield. Case Keenum, on the other hand, an extremely strong arm, somebody who has no problem at throwing the ball downfield. I think that Jarvis Landry's in for a huge game here, especially at lower ownership, because he's the lowest owned of anybody in this range at 11.2%. So I really like that right there, even like going to him at captain, especially because of the price. Donovan Peoples-Jones, I'll probably still have him in my lineups. So I changed him to a no just because I wanted to play Jarvis Landry a little bit more. But I'll probably still have Donovan Peoples-Jones at a few of my lineups. So I'm going to go ahead and at least make him a blank. Somebody who had a very big game last week, but as a result is getting a ton of steam. Earlier on, when I made my core plays video for this Thursday night game, I talked about him being a little bit overlooked, somebody who wasn't going to garner very much ownership. And that was true at the time, but people were box score watching. People were taking a look at last week's performance and really buying in Donovan Peoples-Jones. And what we have to consider is, first of all, Jarvis Landry was not on the field. Otto Beckham Jr. obviously was taken out of the game with injury, and that is going to be the same tonight, but we also have Jarvis Landry around. Also, Rashard Higgins was dealing with a little bit of an injury as well. So there was just nobody to throw the ball to. It was a case of circumstance more than anything, a little bit of a coincidence that he got the targets that he did. So I'm not quite as high on him as the public is, but if he's going to hover right around 13.1% ownership, that's still going to be a level of ownership that I'm willing to stomach. Let's talk about some of these cheaper options. Rashard Higgins, already talked about him in the core plays video. He's cheap enough to where he gives you enough flexibility to spend up elsewhere, which is great to see on this slate. It's only $3,600. Also projected for a decent projection. You can see 12.9 points. So he's not going to break the slate by any means, but I like going there. You know, similar ownership to somebody like Donovan Peoples-Jones. And if that ends up maintaining its pace the whole way up until lock or something like that, we're going to be heavy on Higgins. I mean, almost half the price is Donovan Peoples-Jones, and at the same type of ownership, makes it quite an easy decision for me, in my opinion. Kendall Hinton, if you need an absolute flyer on the slate, go ahead and play Hinton. I think this ownership number, my projections are a little bit too bullish on that number there. I think he comes in closer to maybe 12, 11%, that kind of thing. He is going to get some playing time. Obviously, Tim Patrick and Cortland Sutton are the number 1 and number 2 wide receivers here. The only problem over there in Denver is that they love running 2 tight end sets, and one of their best tight ends is not going to be playing. We know that for sure. That is going to be Albert O. He is on IR as of right now. So the Broncos, as a result, have gone to more 3 wide receiver sets. So if this was week 1, week 2, or something like that, Hinton would be a complete non-factor. But here, with a little bit of different play calling that we expect from Denver, could end up seeing some usage. And this is a guy who ended up playing quarterback for them last year, if you guys remember. Looked horrendous, but he was extremely athletic. They were using him as a rushing quarterback. It's very good after the catch. They use him on punt returns, kick returns, that kind of thing. So even if his role is just screen passes, even if it is just those little jet sweeps or that kind of thing, could still end up paying it off. Somebody that's a little bit more consistent. I also like the price tag difference. He's only $1,200 as opposed to $2,000. Is Anthony Schwartz, just because if Otto Beckham Jr. ends up sitting, he's going to be the clear number 3 option on this team. Somebody I will be targeting. We saw him have a very good week 1, a decent week 2, and they kind of fell off the face of the earth. He was dealing with a few drops from time to time, obviously just due to circumstances. He was a number 4 or even number 5 wide receiver at times. So just not going to see many targets in this offense, especially for an offense that doesn't throw it very much. But here in a game scenario where the Cleveland Browns are going to have to throw the ball more, we know they are because they're without their 2 top running backs. Also a different quarterback in there that likes to throw the ball downfield. Also that has a lot of familiarity with Schwartz. And I think a lot of people discount this fact. He's Keenum's the backup quarterback. That means he plays with the number 2 team, right? He plays with the backups. And Anthony Schwartz, people like Rashard Higgins, even at times, they're playing with the number 2 team. And he has a lot of familiarity with them by playing in practices, so on and so forth. And I think that could very well bear out tonight. And you can see a few extra targets going Schwartz's way. If you want a pure flyer play, not somebody that I'll be playing tonight, you could go to Deontay Spencer. So going to be playing the role after Hinton. Perhaps instead of using Hinton on some of these screen passes, instead of some of those fly sweeps, that kind of thing, they could use Deontay Spencer. Deontay Spencer is their primary returner. I like using him a little bit more than Kendall Hinton. Just to this point, in terms of snap load, Hinton has far outweighed Spencer in terms of offensive snaps. So it really depends on what you're looking for. Kind of depends on what we're going to have to do there. Got a question in the chat. I'm confused on Landry. Should we be playing him? I am. Yeah, why not, man? He got activated 2 days ago. We weren't expecting him to be in the player pool at the beginning of the week, but got off the IR very early on in the week. Hasn't even had a injury tag for the entire week. Seemingly 100% healthy. I'm playing him. I think that this team's going to be throwing the ball a lot more than we expect. A lot more than we've seen to this point of the year. And should be the clear number 1 wide receiver tonight. Again, we haven't heard about Otto Beckham Jr., but as of right now, I'm projecting him out. So if he ends up playing, obviously, you might see a little bit of a downturn in production. But as of right now, with Otto Beckham Jr. out, looking like one of the best plays on the entire slate. Let's go down to the tight ends here. So let's start off with Noah Fant, who had a questionable tag at the beginning of the week. Same thing with David Njoku, but both will be good to suit up. They're a little bit expensive, right? So $8,200 for Fant, $5,400 for Njoku. The one that I'm definitely siding towards is going to be Fant, just because I think he has a larger role in this offense. Obviously, with Judy not going to be suiting up, we know that he's going to stay on IR. He is going to be the number 2 wide receiver threat on this team. So obviously, Cortland Sutton is going to be the 1A. Noah Fant would be the 1B there. You can see he's not popping in my projections. I haven't just a 13-point projection. But if anybody has red zone upside on this team, it's Noah Fant. He's a large-bodied tight end, somebody who's very good at high-pointing the ball. So here on these showdown slates, those are guys I like to target a little bit more than those guys that do it with their yardage. And see, in a lower total game as well, we're dealing with just a 41.5 over-under, which I think it should be closer to something like 44, 45 for what it's worth. The tight ends end up being a little bit more valuable, right? You're looking at more PPR upside. You're looking for true top touchdown upside to hit up the optimal projection. So I do like Noah Fant here. David Njoku, he's just a little bit overrated, a little bit overpriced. He had that massive game out of nowhere where he had those 2 super long touchdowns where he took little 5-yard passes and turned them into 80-yard gains. We're not going to see that very often from David Njoku. You could actually argue that the number 1 tight end on this team is Austin Hooper. He's actually priced below David Njoku. So I look at those 2 tight ends as very similar talent levels. They play very similar snap loads as well. And if I was going to pick one of the 2, I guess I would take, I see it's hard to even say because they vulture each other's snaps. I think if you're going to take one of these tight ends or any of them at all, you need to pick one and stick with them. It's very hard to play Njoku and Hooper and to try and get leverage on both of them. So you can see as of right now, I have Njoku as the play. He is coming in as the higher owned of the 2 options, potentially has higher ceiling. I mean, Austin Hooper, he's a true possession tight end, a true blocking tight end as well. Not going to get you that 70, 80-yard touchdown. Njoku, on the other hand, we've seen that from him before. So in cash games, I'm probably going to Hooper a little bit more just because he's cheaper, just because he's a little bit more consistent. But in terms of pure GPP winning upside, David Njoku is probably the one you want to go to. And I know that's the cop-out answer saying both of them, but I don't think there's a right answer between those two. Neither one's a great play for what it's worth. So if you want to avoid both of them completely, just because they do vulture into each other's production, I cannot blame you for doing so. Let's go through a few of these cheaper tight ends. Eric Saubert is going to see a few snaps for this team. I mean, Noah Fant, clearly the number one option for Denver, but in the red zone, when they want to use two tight end sets, they are going to use Saubert. Again, Albert O not going to be playing. We know he's going to be staying on IR for this game. So Saubert still going to see a few snaps. When Albert O comes back, that goes completely out the window, right? He's going to go back to seeing 0 snaps a game. And this is Harrison Bryant. I don't know. It auto-corrected to Harris Bryant. It's weird. It's Harrison Bryant. He plays for the Browns. He is their third string tight end. Already has a touchdown on the year. Is going to play in the red zone, especially if Njoku or Hooper ends up getting a little bit winded. And when they get in the red zone, a lot of times they go to Njoku and Bryant rather than using somebody like Hooper. So I don't hate going to Bryant. He's only $200, and we've seen this happen before where a $200 player that goes out and only scores a point or two ends up being optimal. It's just because of the savings that you get. You're able to spend up at one or even two other positions because he's essentially costing you nothing in your lineup. Definitely going to make my player pool. He's that dead minimum option that I'm most confident about this week. I'm probably playing on about 15, 20% of my lineups. Let's get down to the defenses and kickers, and let's talk holistically about them just before we go individually through these options here. In terms of defenses, you're going to see a lot higher ownership on defenses on the slate than you typically ever see. When you get a game total closer to 40 or even just 45 points, people just go nuts for the defenses. They get a hard on for them. For a good metaphor there, it's annoying. I'm not going to play any defenses. When that tends to happen, when you get something chalky like a defense in a scenario where an optimal captain, especially even an optimal flex position for one of these defenses, is a rare occurrence. It only happens in about 11% of showdown contests. So for me, if defenses are coming in sub 11% ownership, then I'm willing to go to them. But you can see right here, both coming in close to 20% ownership. That's enough to fade them right there. It's just very unlikely that even as a flex position, these defenses wind up optimal, let alone at the captain slot. It happens about once a year. We get a defense that ends up being optimal at the captain slot. I just don't see it. I don't end up seeing it happening here. So again, it's just a game theory play for me. I'm not going to be playing these defenses. I don't think it's necessary. Even if you see 14, less points scored on each side, you're still looking at needing 5 or 6 sacks, maybe even a defensive touchdown to be optimal. Not something I'm prioritizing. Let's talk about the kickers. If I'm going to go to a kicker on the slate, it's probably going to be the Cleveland Browns kicker. So that is Chase McLaughlin, just because they don't have the running backs. They're dealing with using Dearness Johnson, who is a little bit less of a power back than Kareem Johnson, and Nick Chubb, somebody who is a little bit more of an explosive back. So if they get into the red zone, they might have a little bit of trouble punching it in. So I could see McLaughlin getting a few extra, or maybe just one extra field goal attempt. That can end up making the difference there. Brandon McManus, I don't hate either. He's just going to be a little bit more chalky. He's going to be a little bit higher owned than McLaughlin. And we do expect that offense to be a little bit more effective in the red zone. So don't hate going to either of those, but I am avoiding those defenses. They're going to end up chalky tonight. You could see this Broncos defense, particularly because they're playing against a backup quarterback and they're playing against a backup running back in the 25, maybe even 30% range in some single entry stuff. I'm going to be avoiding that just purely from a game theory perspective. So what I want to do now, before we end up getting out of here, so we can make our lineups and get to whatever else we need to do here tonight, let's talk about a few of the game flows I expect. So a few of the just, let's say, situational type of game flows I'm going to try and target. So this is the most important part of the video, in my opinion. I mean, we just went over the median projections, which are good to see. It's obviously insightful and helpful when making your lineups. If you want to win a GPP, if you want a top 0.01% lineup, you have to be thinking about a game script. So for me, let's start with a few of the game scripts. Let's start with two of the obvious ones. So first of all, an onslaught for the Broncos, which it seems like a lot of people in the industry are playing for. People expect the Broncos to be a little bit more effective on offense. Obviously, they still have their starting quarterback. They also have a lot less people injured. And while I understand that theory, I think if that was a contrarian game script, I would be all over it. I'd be like, yeah, that makes perfect sense. On paper, they're the underdog. That's what everyone's going with. That is the chalk build this week. The chalk build is not going with the favorite, which to me is completely backwards. Every single week, I'm somebody who loves being contrarian. I mean, don't get me wrong, but you want to be contrarian when it makes sense. And any situation here where it's clearly being contrarian here just doesn't necessarily make sense. It's just being contrarian to be contrarian. I'm not in agreement with it. I definitely like this Brown side of things. So for me, going to that Case Keenum, going to a lot of those pass catchers is going to be the way that I go after it. Just let's talk about the chalk build though. So this is the build I'm going to try and avoid. Is going to people, first of all, like Teddy Bridgewater, maybe using Cortland's son at captain, probably playing one of those running backs, either Gordon or somebody like Javonte Williams, and then filling it out with a few of the really cheap Cleveland options. That's how they're going to get access to this Cleveland team. They're going to play somebody like Dearness Johnson. They're going to go to a Rashard Higgins or a Donovan Peoples-Jones and then use 4 or 5 of these Broncos players. And again, if that was a contrarian or a sneaky build, I'd probably be all over it, but that's going to be chalk. If you enter a lineup like that, you're probably duplicating yourself with at least 100 lineups. So keep that in mind. I'm avoiding that type of play. It's much higher in terms of expected value to go after some of these sneakier plays. So a game script I am going to be playing tonight, this is going to be the main script that I'm using for my lineups. It's going to be if Cleveland comes out, gets the job done, it's going to win here by about, let's say 7 to 10 points, that kind of thing, but does it by passing the ball. Again, that's what I expect to happen. I mean, we have a team with a completely different quarterback. They're down. They're both their starting running backs. They do have their wide receivers coming back from injury. What does that, scream to me? It screams pass the ball, right? You can't just continue running the ball when all of these people that you're relying on to do that aren't here anymore. You have to adapt. You have to play with the cards that you've been dealt. You can't be trying to pull blackjack out of your ass when you have a 6 in the hole, that kind of thing. It's just not the smart way to play your cards. So for me, Case Keenum, I absolutely love him in that type of game script. I could even play him at captain. Really like people like Jarvis Landry, like Rashard Higgins because of that price tag, and probably taking at least one of those tight ends. And now finally, let's talk about a game script that I do not expect to happen whatsoever, but it would be a smart way to take the Broncos side of things, but do it in a contrarian manner. That would be if they went out and completely just kicked the Browns' ass. And I mean like stomped them into the ground. I mean, Case Keenum's throwing like 3 or 4 picks, that kind of thing. You're dealing with hardly any yardage. In that type of scenario, I'm looking at a 5-1 split between the Broncos and the Browns. And I'm picking a very specific player for the Browns in this type of scenario. I'm going to somebody potentially like a Harrison Bryant at $200 and then completely flooding this Broncos team. I mean, playing Sun at captain, playing Bridgewater, making sure you fit in Noah Fant, maybe even Melvin Gordon, and then with the rest of your salary, fitting in who you can, which is probably Tim Patrick or something like that. If you're going to take, this onslaught from the Broncos side, I think you have to go completely balls deep with it. That's the way that I'm going to be playing this slate. Again, my goal is to be playing game scripts that are relatively common occurrences, something that is within the realm of reason, but keep it contrarian, right? I'm not just going to be contrarian just to be contrarian. Everyone's going to go out there tonight and play the Broncos thinking that they're, mega minding everyone else, and they're going to be walking into a chalk build. So that's my word of caution for you guys tonight. Is you're going to hear everyone harping about playing the Broncos, and thinking that they're contrarian when they're not. So just keep that in mind. That's all we've got for this live stream. Thank you guys for stopping by. As always, we're going to be doing this for our Monday night stream. That'll be Monday at 6 p.m. And of course, we're going to be doing our main slate stream on Sunday at 11:30 a.m. Eastern time. So until then, good luck with your lineups. And you guys can leave any questions if you're watching the replay here, and I'll get to them as soon as I can. So